As the first light of morning broke across the sky, the day took an unsettling turn for a group of close friends. They received an unexpected phone call that immediately raised alarms. The co-worker explained, with noticeable worry in her voice, that Jessica had failed to show up for her scheduled shift, something completely out of character for her. Sensing that something was wrong, John sprang into action. Without hesitation, he reached out to his colleagues in law enforcement and requested their help in tracking Jessica's phone. The signal led them to a quiet parking lot outside a local restaurant, just a few miles from Jessica's home. As they pulled in, an eerie sense of dread filled the air. Parked inconspicuously in the lot was Jessica's car. But everything changed the moment they approached the vehicle and looked inside. The sight that met them was both shocking and devastating, confirming their deepest fears. Hey friends, liking, commenting, and subscribing only takes a few seconds, but it means so much to us. Every click and comment fuels our passion. Thanks. Today, we're going to look into a real-life case and review photos related to Jessica Lynn Kaler, who was born on May 8, 1982, in the vibrant city of Austin, Texas. Raised in a loving household, Jessica spent her formative years alongside her parents and two brothers, creating memories full of warmth, laughter, and strong family bonds. Her early life in Austin was filled with the kind of childhood most people would hope for. Bike rides through quiet streets, sleepovers with friends, and afternoons spent reading on the porch. But things eventually changed when her family decided to relocate to a quieter, more rural town known as Fluker. Although moving away from the only home she had known was difficult at first, Jessica adjusted with her signature optimism and adaptability. From a young age, Jessica stood out for her bright personality. She was the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and walk out with a handful of new friends. Her approachable nature and friendly demeanor made her well-liked by almost everyone she met. But her charm wasn't her only strength. Jessica was also highly driven and incredibly focused on her future. Even in high school, she knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life. She dreamed of becoming a teacher, someone who could make a difference in the lives of children and help shape young minds. With that goal in mind, Jessica enrolled at Texas State University, where she pursued a Bachelor of Science degree. She was passionate about education and took her studies seriously, often spending long hours buried in textbooks and coursework. But unlike many of her peers, Jessica didn't stop once she received her diploma. She had her sights set even higher and made the decision to enroll in a master's program to further her education and increase her impact in the classroom. To support herself financially, Jessica worked multiple jobs while continuing her studies. She secured a position as a teaching assistant at an elementary school, gaining valuable experience while contributing meaningfully to the lives of her students. At the same time, she worked part-time at a local grocery store. Balancing academics and two jobs wasn't easy, especially with the added pressure of student loans and monthly bills. But Jessica never let it break her spirit. She carried herself with grace and resilience, always believing that her dedication would eventually lead her to the life she was working so hard to build. By September of 2009, Jessica was 27 years old and still juggling both her studies and her two jobs. She remained hopeful and enthusiastic, especially because there were signs that a full-time teaching position at her school might soon open up. That possibility gave her a renewed sense of motivation. Finally, she could start the career she had dreamed about for so many years. On September 7, 2009, Jessica had the rare opportunity to take a day off. Wanting to enjoy some much-needed downtime, she spent the day with close friends and her cousin Melanie. They kicked off the afternoon by relaxing at the pool, sharing stories and laughter under the warm Texas sun. Later, they headed out for dinner at a local restaurant, enjoying good food and each other's company. As the evening rolled on, they stopped by a neighborhood bar, played a few rounds of pool, and continued the fun into the late hours. Jessica, always the responsible one, volunteered to be the designated driver, ensuring everyone got home safely. After dropping off each friend, she finally arrived at Melanie's place around 1:30 a.m. Melanie offered her cousin the guest room for the night, concerned that Jessica must be exhausted. But Jessica politely declined. She had an early shift at the grocery store and wanted to swing by a 24-hour store to pick up food for her dogs before heading home. The two cousins hugged goodnight, neither knowing it would be the last time they'd see each other. As the sun began to rise the following morning, Melanie received a call that immediately caused concern. A coworker from Jessica's store phoned to say that Jessica hadn't shown up for her shift. This was completely out of character. Jessica was known for her reliability and dedication, especially since she had recently been promoted to store manager. Missing work without calling in simply wasn't something she would do. Worried, Melanie began calling around to see if anyone had heard from Jessica. Unfortunately, no one had. She eventually contacted Jessica's brother, John, who shared an apartment with her. John was a police officer and had started his shift early that morning, around 5:30 a.m. He mentioned that he hadn't seen Jessica that morning and hadn't checked her room before leaving. Alarmed by the news, John immediately returned home. When John walked into their shared apartment, his concern deepened. There were no signs that Jessica had come home the night before. Her belongings hadn't been touched, and her dogs were behaving anxiously, suggesting they hadn't been fed or let out in quite some time. It was a chilling realization. Something was clearly wrong. Without wasting any time, John contacted his fellow officers and requested assistance in locating Jessica's phone. Law enforcement quickly initiated a trace and managed to pinpoint the phone's last known location. The signal led them to a restaurant parking lot just a few miles from Jessica's home. John notified Melanie, who, along with her boyfriend, rushed to the location. When they arrived, their worst fears were confirmed. Jessica's car was parked quietly in the lot. At first glance, it looked like any other vehicle left overnight. But as they approached the car and looked inside, the mood shifted dramatically. What they found was deeply upsetting and heartbreaking. Jessica was inside, and it was immediately apparent that she was no longer alive. Melanie's boyfriend made the emergency call. Authorities arrived swiftly. Officers secured the scene, and paramedics confirmed that Jessica was dead, and her body was sent for further examination. While early details were limited, it was clear that something violent had occurred. As forensic teams began examining the vehicle, a few troubling clues emerged. The driver's seat had been pushed far back, suggesting that someone much taller than Jessica may have been in control of the vehicle. Investigators theorized that an altercation could have taken place inside the car itself. Adding to the suspicion, Jessica's wallet, keys, and credit cards were missing. In the back seat, they found a recently purchased bag of dog food, a heartbreaking reminder that Jessica had been simply trying to care for her pets. Taken together, the evidence painted a deeply unsettling picture. Jessica had made one last stop on her way home, as planned, but something had gone terribly wrong. What began as a regular night out ended in tragedy. After conducting a careful and methodical examination of Jessica Kaler's vehicle, detectives knew there was more ground to cover. The parking lot where her car had been discovered was situated just outside a local restaurant, a familiar 24-hour spot known to residents of the area. Hoping to find security footage, eyewitness accounts, or even someone who might have seen Jessica during her final hours, investigators entered the restaurant and began speaking with employees. That's when the case took a sudden and perplexing turn. One of the restaurant's employees, who had arrived early for her morning shift, shared a piece of information that was as eerie as it was unexpected. She mentioned that when she first pulled into the lot that day, she immediately noticed Jessica's car. What's more unsettling was that Jessica was still alive at the time. According to the employee, Jessica was sitting alone in her vehicle, but something about her behavior didn't seem right. The witness described her movements as odd. She chalked it up to someone having a rough morning and continued inside to begin her shift. Roughly 30 minutes later, the same employee stepped outside to take a short break. This time, the situation had changed slightly. Jessica was no longer sitting inside the car. She was outside, right next to the vehicle. While she had redressed herself, the employee noted that Jessica still appeared mentally distant. She was sitting on the ground, running her fingers repeatedly through her hair and staring blankly into space, almost as if she were caught in a loop of thought or confusion. Even then, the employee hesitated to intervene, unsure of what exactly was going on. The third time she ventured outside, the scene had shifted once again. Jessica was back inside her vehicle. From a distance, it looked like she was talking to herself. Her hands moved in strange, erratic gestures, and her mouth was clearly forming words, but there was no one else in the car. To those watching, it seemed like Jessica was either deeply distressed. Still, not a single bystander chose to approach her or call for assistance. Despite the mounting strangeness of the situation, no one alerted authorities or medical professionals. When detectives learned this information, they circled back to someone they trusted for clarity: Jessica's cousin, Melanie. They needed to determine whether Jessica might have been under the influence of any substances that could explain such behavior. But Melanie was quick to set the record straight. She told them with absolute certainty that Jessica had not consumed any alcohol. She reminded them that Jessica had been the designated driver the night before, fully responsible for getting everyone home safely, and that she had work the next morning. More importantly, Melanie emphasized that Jessica never even drank. It simply wasn't part of her lifestyle. To support Melanie's statement, detectives later received the toxicology report. It confirmed everything Jessica's cousin had said. There were no traces of alcohol or any other substances in her system. That left investigators searching for another explanation. After consulting with medical professionals, a new theory began to emerge, one rooted in both medical science and environmental factors. Experts proposed that Jessica may have suffered a traumatic incident earlier in the night, something severe enough to cause or cognitive disruption. And when combined with the fact that she had been sitting inside a locked vehicle for hours, possibly in rising heat as the morning sun intensified, her behavior may have been the result of disorientation brought on by both physical trauma and heat exposure. Under these conditions, it's plausible that Jessica didn't realize how serious her condition was, or may not have been fully aware of what was happening to her. Sadly, if even one witness had reached out for medical help, there's a chance Jessica could have received life-saving treatment in time. But now, that opportunity was gone. What remained was a growing mystery, and investigators were determined to get answers. With few physical clues to rely on, detectives shifted their focus to digital evidence, specifically surveillance footage. Unfortunately, the immediate area around the restaurant lacked security cameras. It was a frustrating obstacle, but not the end of the trail. They recalled that Jessica had planned to buy food for her dogs that night. Given the late hour, there was only one likely destination: a nearby Walmart store, just across the street and open 24 hours. Detectives quickly obtained the security footage from that location and combed through the recordings. There, in the early morning hours, they spotted her. Jessica, alive and appearing completely calm. She pulled into the parking lot by herself and entered the store, walking with purpose. There was no hint of distress in her body language. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She moved directly to the pet supplies aisle, picked up a large bag of dog food, and proceeded to the checkout counter. After paying for her items, she exited the store without incident. However, what happened next caught investigators' attention. Just seconds after Jessica walked out of the store, another individual followed behind her. A man. Surveillance footage showed that he had entered the parking lot shortly before Jessica, but his behavior raised immediate suspicions. He had parked his vehicle at the far end of the lot, far from most shoppers, and then headed not into the store aisles but directly into the restroom. Moments later, he walked out and exited the store entirely, never making a purchase. The timing was uncanny. What disturbed investigators even more was what the next camera failed to show. Jessica's car had been parked behind a large, leafy tree near the edge of the lot. Because of the angle and the obstruction, the security cameras lost view of both Jessica and the man once they reached that area. However, the sequence of events painted a chilling picture. The man followed Jessica toward her car and disappeared behind the tree. And then, 2 minutes later, Jessica's car pulled out of the parking lot. That same vehicle was next seen on another camera as it entered the restaurant lot where her body would later be discovered. But there was one final haunting image. After Jessica's car came to a stop in the restaurant lot, several minutes passed. Then a figure stepped out of the driver's side door. This person walked across the lot, heading straight for parking area, where he got in the same vehicle the suspicious man had arrived in earlier. By this point in the investigation, detectives were nearly convinced that the unidentified man seen following Jessica Kaler from the Walmart store, and later walking away from her parked car, was directly involved in what had happened to her. Everything about his behavior suggested that his presence wasn't accidental. But there was a significant obstacle. Despite hours of surveillance footage, the visual quality was just too poor to make out the fine details of the man's face or to clearly read the license plate on his vehicle. Both he and his red pickup truck were visible on camera, but the images were too grainy to use for a positive identification. Still, detectives knew they couldn't stop there. Every clue mattered, so they turned their attention to another angle: Jessica's missing belongings. Her wallet and credit cards had never been recovered, which raised the possibility that whoever was responsible might have tried to use them. Investigators quickly contacted her bank and began reviewing her account activity. That's when they found a critical lead. Roughly 20 minutes after Jessica's vehicle was seen arriving at the restaurant parking lot, the place where her life came to a tragic end, one of her credit cards was used at a nearby gas station. It was a potentially huge breakthrough. The transaction was logged just in time for the store's security system to have captured it. Without delay, detectives visited the gas station and secured the surveillance footage. As they reviewed the tape, everything began to line up. The same red pickup truck from the Walmart footage pulled up to the pump. Then, at the register camera, the pieces came together. The same man spotted following Jessica out of the Walmart appeared on screen again, this time making a purchase with Jessica's card. There was no longer any question about it. Whoever this man was, he now had direct possession of Jessica's stolen credit card. And that connection, along with his suspicious movements earlier, only made the case against him stronger. With this vital new evidence in hand, investigators decided it was time to bring the public into the fold. They released still images and clips from the surveillance footage, including clear shots of the man and his red pickup truck, to local news outlets. Law enforcement hoped someone watching might recognize him and come forward. Sometimes all it takes is one phone call to break open an investigation, and that call came sooner than they expected. Just a few days later, a woman named Leslie contacted police after seeing the footage aired on TV. Her voice was steady but concerned. She told detectives that the man in the video looked almost exactly like someone she knew, her fiancé's best friend, a 29-year-old named Crispin Harmel. But it wasn't just his appearance that caught her attention. There was also the matter of timing. According to Leslie, Crispin had been scheduled to stop by her home on the same evening Jessica was last seen. He had borrowed money from her a while back and promised to repay it that night, but he never showed up. And then, just days later, there he was, on the news. Leslie couldn't ignore the similarities, and even though the possibility that Crispin might be involved in something so serious was deeply unsettling, she knew she had to do the right thing. She picked up the phone and reported what she knew. Once detectives had Crispin Harmel's name, the investigation picked up speed. They started digging into his background and quickly discovered something interesting. Just a few weeks before Jessica's death, Crispin had been pulled over during a routine traffic stop for driving with an expired license. The stop had been recorded on the officer's body camera, and when detectives reviewed the footage, they immediately recognized him. It was the same man from the gas station. Even more compelling, he was wearing a distinctive baseball cap, the exact same one seen in the Walmart and gas station footage. 5 days after Jessica's body had been discovered, police arrived at Crispin's residence. Right away, they spotted a red pickup truck parked in the driveway. The vehicle was the same make and model as the one seen on video, but something had changed. In the surveillance footage, the truck had chrome-trim details, shiny metallic accents that were clearly visible under the streetlights. Now, those same features had been painted over in black. The change was subtle but deliberate. To detectives, it looked like someone was trying to alter the truck's appearance just enough to avoid recognition. When police knocked on Crispin's door, they expected resistance, or at least hesitation. But to their surprise, he opened the door calmly and began talking almost immediately. In fact, he offered up a story before they even asked. He told investigators that he had met Jessica that night. According to him, the two had connected on an online platform and arranged to meet in person for the first time. Crispin's version of events was oddly detailed. He claimed they met in the Walmart parking lot, where he got into Jessica's car. From there, he said, she drove them to a quiet park where they sat and talked. After their conversation, Jessica drove him back to Walmart. Before parting ways, he told her about his financial struggles. Then, according to him, Jessica generously offered her credit card so he could fill up his gas tank. He said they said their goodbyes, and he left. Later, after seeing reports about Jessica's death, he admitted he panicked. Worried that the story wouldn't look good, he said he threw away the card and painted over parts of his truck to avoid suspicion. But while Crispin's story might have sounded rehearsed, detectives already knew too much for it to hold water. His account simply didn't align with the evidence. For one, the Walmart surveillance footage clearly showed that Crispin did not meet Jessica upon her arrival. Instead, he followed her out of the store, never once approaching her until she had returned to her vehicle. There was no recorded interaction between them prior to that moment. That fact alone contradicted his claim that they had planned to meet in the parking lot. Even more revealing, the cameras captured what happened after Jessica walked to her car. While Crispin disappeared behind the tree blocking the view of Jessica's vehicle, the next footage showed Jessica's car leaving the parking lot with no return trip to drop anyone off. Meanwhile, the same cameras later recorded Crispin walking alone back to his red pickup truck, which remained parked where he had left it. Detectives now had two conflicting stories, one from Crispin and one told by the evidence. And the cameras weren't the only source of truth. When police seized both Crispin's phone and Jessica's electronic devices, including her computer and mobile records, they found yet another contradiction. Despite his claim that the two had met online and arranged to connect, there was no record of any communication between them. No text messages, no emails, no direct messages, not even a missed call. In fact, investigators found no indication that Jessica had ever visited the website Crispin named in his story. To detectives, that sealed it. The timeline, the inconsistencies, the altered vehicle, the possession of Jessica's credit card, all of it pointed in one direction. As investigators continued to examine the digital trail left behind by Crispin Harmel, they discovered something that added yet another layer of suspicion. While combing through his computer's browser history, they uncovered a timeline that seemed far too coincidental to ignore. In the early morning hours, just after police discovered Jessica Kaler's body in her car, Crispin had been online, actively searching for news articles related to her death. He didn't just read a headline and move on. He clicked on multiple stories from various local news outlets, reading them in depth. The timing of those searches raised immediate red flags. Investigators noted that Crispin's alleged meeting with Jessica, according to his story, had been casual and brief, nothing more than a spontaneous conversation with a stranger in a Walmart parking lot. So why, then, was he so intensely focused on reading every available article just hours later? And more importantly, how did he even know she had died? Unless he already knew what had happened before the news broke publicly. This revelation didn't surprise Jessica's friends or family. In fact, they had been skeptical of Crispin's story from the moment it surfaced. Those who knew Jessica best were certain. She wasn't the kind of person who would agree to meet a stranger late at night, let alone alone in a parking lot. That behavior simply didn't match who she was, not in temperament, values, or routine. Her cousin Melanie, who had been the last person to see her alive, recalled clearly that Jessica had mentioned needing to pick up dog food and get some rest before her early work shift. She hadn't said anything about meeting up with anyone or taking time for social plans. Her night was supposed to be simple, responsible, as always. Feed the dogs, get some sleep, go to work. The idea that she would abruptly shift course and meet a total stranger for a spontaneous rendezvous simply didn't align with her personality. For detectives, this strengthened their theory. Crispin wasn't telling the truth. His version of events looked more and more like an effort to distance himself from responsibility, to spin a narrative that painted Jessica's death as a bizarre coincidence, rather than the result of a deliberate and calculated act. Piecing together surveillance footage from Walmart, the gas station, and surrounding areas, investigators developed a timeline that painted a far more plausible and troubling picture. In this version, Crispin hadn't arranged to meet Jessica at all. Instead, he likely spotted her inside the store as she shopped for dog food. Once she left the store and headed to her car, the cameras showed him doing the same. Then, he vanished behind the tree that blocked the vehicle from view. A few minutes later, Jessica's car pulled away, and she was never seen alive again by anyone who knew her. Detectives believed that sometime between Walmart and the restaurant parking lot where her body was found, Crispin may have coerced her to drive to a more secluded location, possibly a nearby park. There, they believed, something happened, something traumatic enough to cause the physical and neurological symptoms Jessica later displayed. Once he returned her car to the restaurant lot, closer to his own parked truck, he took her wallet and credit cards and disappeared. When detectives confronted Crispin with this version of events, he refused to continue speaking. His previously cooperative attitude evaporated. Without offering any defense, he asked for an attorney. Although the circumstantial evidence was compelling, investigators quickly realized they were facing a legal dilemma, one that could jeopardize their entire case. The issue was unusual and complex. Multiple witnesses had seen Jessica alive after her last known interaction with Crispin. In fact, several had described her behavior in the early morning hours. These sightings proved that she had survived for several hours after the suspected attack. And while this was an important piece of the puzzle, it also created a legal gray area. For a murder charge to succeed in court, prosecutors needed to prove that the actions of the accused had directly led to the victim's death. The complication? Jessica's manner of death was highly unusual. Medical professionals couldn't say with 100% certainty why she remained alive for so long. There was no documented precedent. In all the years of forensic and medical literature, there had never been a confirmed case in which a person had been attacked, survived for hours in a disoriented state, and then passed away from those injuries without showing clear symptoms at first. Prosecutors feared that if they moved forward with a murder charge, a defense attorney could raise enough reasonable doubt to sway a jury. And without a confession from Crispin, the case remained vulnerable. Meanwhile, detectives continued their efforts to link Crispin more directly to the crime scene. They thoroughly searched Jessica's car, hoping to uncover DNA evidence, fingerprints, or anything else that might tie him to her final moments. But the car had been sitting in a public lot for hours, and unfortunately, they came up empty. No physical evidence connected Crispin to the vehicle, at least not conclusively. Still, there was one thing working in the investigators' favor. Crispin had admitted, on record, to destroying evidence. By his own words, he had thrown away Jessica's credit card and repainted his truck after seeing the news. These weren't acts of someone with nothing to hide. They were clear, deliberate attempts to avoid detection. So, in May of 2010, prosecutors filed a lesser but still serious charge: evidence tampering. While it didn't carry the weight of a homicide conviction, it gave the legal system something solid to work with. With no confession and no definitive physical evidence, this charge allowed them to keep Crispin off the streets while continuing to investigate. Crispin eventually pleaded guilty to the charge and received a 10-year prison sentence. It wasn't the justice Jessica's loved ones had hoped for, but it was a start. And importantly, it bought detectives more time. The case might have gone cold, but investigators never gave up. For years, they continued combing through emerging forensic science, hoping to find something that would support their theory, a connection that could scientifically validate the idea. Then, in 2013, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source: a medical research journal. In this publication, doctors detailed case studies involving a rare but scientifically recognized phenomenon. In these cases, the victim didn't die. Instead, the trauma disrupted oxygen flow to the brain, resulting in a cascade of neurological symptoms: confusion, difficulty speaking, erratic behavior, and an inability to seek help. The condition, now referred to in forensic literature as delayed cerebral anoxia, matched Jessica's behavior in disturbing detail. This discovery changed everything. The symptoms described in the article, wandering, disorientation, and repetitive behavior, were the same ones witnesses observed in Jessica the morning after her presumed attack. The condition explained how she could have survived for several hours, functioning on a surface level, yet never realizing she was in danger. It also confirmed the medical examiner's original suspicion. With this new information, the forensic theory behind the case had a stronger foundation. Jessica's injuries, behavior, and delayed passing were no longer unexplained outliers. They were medically documented symptoms of a known condition. And that gave prosecutors hope that justice could still be served in full. They immediately reached out to the medical expert who authored the study, a leading figure in the field of neuroforensics. With renewed determination and the support of science on their side, prosecutors moved forward with a new strategy. In May of 2018, after years of building their case, They officially charged Crispin Harmel with murder. The charge marked a significant shift in momentum. This time, the case wasn't just built on circumstantial evidence, but also on emerging medical research that finally explained what had once seemed medically impossible. But as expected, Crispin maintained his innocence. When the case went to trial, his defense team centered their argument around one major theme: the absence of DNA evidence. In particular, they emphasized the fact that no biological material linked their client directly to Carr. In response, the prosecution brought forward forensic specialists who explained a critical and often misunderstood aspect of DNA science. DNA can degrade quickly in extreme environmental conditions. Jessica's car had sat in the morning heat for hours. The temperature inside would have risen rapidly, something that's been scientifically shown to break down delicate genetic material over time. To bolster their argument, prosecutors leaned heavily on the timeline constructed from surveillance footage. Each piece of footage, each timestamp, and every witness statement had been carefully layered into a compelling step-by-step reconstruction. The prosecution also reminded the jury of Crispin's actions: his suspicious internet activity, the disposal of her belongings, his misleading story about meeting Jessica online, despite there being no trace of communication between them. And finally, the paint job done on his truck. The defense continued to question the absence of physical evidence, but the momentum had shifted. This time, the jury wasn't swayed. After years of legal battles, heartbreaking delays, and emotional strain for everyone involved, justice was finally delivered. Crispin Harmel was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.